After the climax of the long-awaited Itachi vs Sasuke fight, Sasuke is taken in by Obito, who had sent Zetsu as a spy to record the entire fight, and is seemingly told the truth about his big brother, Itachi, by Obito's word, and most of Obito's story checks out, at least when it comes to Itachi, as we have Itachi himself confirm this later when he's revived in the fourth war by Edo Tensei. When Obito is referring to the Madara points of the story, he's wrong a lot of the time, but that's not really important. The important part here is that he's seemingly spot on about Itachi's intentions, and even if every single detail wasn't correct, the general idea that Sasuke killed someone who was in reality just a good guy dealt a bad hand by life. It would seem as if Kishimoto covered his bases for this fairly well, going out of his way to make Obito say things about when Itachi appeared in the story to make them seem like acts of heroism or protection shadowed by Itachi's acts as an Akatsuki villain. But was this always the case? Was Itachi truly meant to be the good guy we know him as now? Or did Kishimoto change this narrative from how he was in part 1 and the beginning of part 2 in favor of this more likable, caring Itachi? That's exactly what I'm going to be determining here. But before we get into it, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you like Naruto content, but let's get started. Around a year ago, I made a video on Naruto's lack of plot holes, and in it I mentioned how I thought Naruto had little to no plot holes, and my exact quote was that I thought it only had one. I've mostly since changed that opinion, and some of the things I'll get into this video are probably plot holes. Just a fair warning before getting started, but while determining if Itachi was always meant to be the bad guy, let's take a look at all the actions he took or words he said throughout his time alive as part of the franchise to see if it was all really smoke and mirrors. Our first time meeting Itachi is in chapter 141, but our first time seeing him is on the first page of chapter 139, having a dialogue with Kisame, where he calls Konoha pathetic for suffering such a heavy loss against Orochimaru's invasion when it was once such a prosperous village. This is something Kisame immediately takes note of as out of character for Itachi to mention, and he follows it up with two questions: if Itachi still has feelings of affection for his old village, and if he even has nostalgia, to which Itachi responds, no, none at all. Looking back on this statement with the alleged retcon in mind, it would seem as if Itachi let out his true feelings for a moment upon seeing the village he used to call home in ruins, which would track with Kisame's statement. Itachi mistakenly dropped his act and then lied about it when he actually meant the statement. There are other things about this small interaction that can sort of paint a picture for how Itachi normally acts towards Kisame. Kisame's "even you have nostalgia" question comes off like Itachi normally is very cold-hearted when they normally interact, although we're not told how long Kisame and Itachi have been partners at this point. We just know that they do have a pretty good gauge of each other's power ceilings, as Itachi tells Kisame to back off Kakashi's clone because he couldn't win the fight without suffering massive damage, or Kisame mentioning that Itachi, after using Tsukuyomi on Kakashi, ran the risk of overusing his eye. We also get a good glimpse of those in charge of the group. Itachi normally orders Kisame around, and Kisame listens without questioning those orders. This could be due to a few things, just speculating. Remember, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone reading the story for the first time, since I'm trying to get a genuine idea of what Itachi was supposed to be like at first. The OG Akatsuki could have had leader then assistant type pairs instead of just the two-man cells. Itachi and Kisame could have shared info about their abilities so as just to work better together, and they maybe had been working together for a long time and came to find that out along the way, or Kisame knowingly concedes to Itachi's power and just follows his command for that reason. Regardless, you more or less get the point. There is a lot to take from that first interaction, but I'll try to be more concise moving forward so we're not here for like an hour or something like that. Soon after this statement, we see Itachi in a tee shot with Kisame, seemingly not doing anything, and prior to Kurenai and Asuma approaching them, they seem to just be going to leave the village, which we later learn is because they were tracking down Naruto, who they found at a ramen shop but didn't attack because Jiraiya was with him and they weren't trying to start a war by fighting, obviously, in the middle of the village. This tracks even with Obito's later statement of Itachi being a pacifist. What, however, does not track with this is that his fight with Kurenai, Asuma, and then Kakashi afterwards, Itachi could have just retreated here as he does towards the end of the fight before Kakashi even showed up. This, on top of the fact that he went out of his way to put Kakashi in a coma, is also weird. You can sort of explain the Sasuke one, which I'll get into a little bit later, but this is just a explicit act of evil that could have been 100% avoided. Of course, Itachi after this is heavily fatigued and tired, and he retreats to go find Naruto again. The next time we catch up with him is just prior to his interaction with Naruto, where he is talking to Kisame in seemingly the middle of nowhere. This is just Kisame being concerned about taking on Jiraiya, and while Itachi being drained from Tsukuyomi is just saying that he has a way of getting rid of Jiraiya so they can get directly to Naruto, which we later see is Itachi putting in jutsu on a woman to hit on Jiraiya, which Jiraiya sees through and shows up in time to save Naruto. In this interaction, Itachi was going to allow Kisame to cut Naruto's legs off so that he couldn't run away from them. Then after this, he puts Sasuke under Tsukuyomi and makes him live out his parents' death over and over again while in the genjutsu. This one, like I said, can sort of be explained by Itachi maybe knowing that Jiraiya was searching for Tsunade and knowing that she could heal the mental strain put on Sasuke and wake him up out of his coma, which you could retroactively apply to Kakashi as well and say that why Itachi did it to him, but at least in Sasuke's case, we know Itachi wants him to gain more hatred, and this Tsukuyomi definitely allowed him to, do that. But with Kakashi, as far as I can see, there's just no justification for Itachi doing that. So using Tsukuyomi on two people to mentally cripple them, putting them into a coma, forcing a woman to hit on Jiraiya without her consent, allowing Kisame to dismember Naruto, as well as murdering his entire family aside from Sasuke. I'll just say Itachi is really convincing as the bad guy at this point. After this, we don't see Itachi again outside of the flashbacks of the Uchiha massacre, which I'm going to cover in this video, but not right now. Even though Naruto timeline wise, chronologically, it should be right here. But in the literal last chapter of Naruto Part 1, we see him surrounded by his other quote-unquote Akatsuki members, in which absolutely none of them, besides Kisame, bear any resemblance to the Akatsuki we would later come to see in Naruto Part 2. I think the whole point of this originally was supposed to be that Itachi was the human monster who slaughtered his clan and entire family, alongside these actual monsters, because it simply can't be disputed that these Akatsuki members, outside of Kisame and maybe Sasori, resemble none of our future Akatsuki members that we see in Part 2. This scene also bears what would seemingly be a plot hole, and it's actually my entire reasoning for even questioning this or starting to make this video in the first place, in which one of the Akatsuki members claims that the last time they all gathered like this was around 7 years ago when Orochimaru left the organization. This is an extremely important detail. If you have not been paying attention to the video so far, you should start paying attention from this point forward. This is an extremely important detail to point out because in chapter 140, Orochimaru tells us why he left the Akatsuki, and the reason given is that Itachi was simply too much stronger than him while showing a panel of his severed hand, bearing the Akatsuki ring. Meaning that 7 years ago, Itachi forced Orochimaru out of the Akatsuki. If that's supposed to be true, it would mean Itachi, who was 17 at the end of part 1, was 10 when he first joined the Akatsuki, but that doesn't make sense because of another piece of information we get. We're told by Kakashi during the fight with Itachi in Konoha that Itachi became an Anbu Black Ops captain at the age of 13. Even if we take novel continuity into account, in which Itachi is actually revealed to have been 12 at the time of his ascension to Anbu captain, it still wouldn't add up with the timeline and only add more confusion since we're given the actual time Itachi joined the Akatsuki in that novel, and it's after a conversation with Obito, just like in the manga. So looking at this from this angle, it makes literally no sense at all. There is the possibility that this Akatsuki member is just wrong and Orochimaru actually left the Akatsuki around 4 years ago to make the timeline consistent, but skipping from 4 years to 7 is a pretty weird gap, too weird for me to be charitable to for sure, but that's not the only thing. In Naruto Part 2 or Shippuden, which is 2 to 3 years after Part 1, we're given another statement about Orochimaru's departure, and we are told that it was 10 years ago. So yet another source claiming Itachi joined the Akatsuki at 10 or 11. This is also coming from Kisame, and I'd like to remind everyone that the earlier statement, which was 3 years prior to this one, said Orochimaru left 7 years ago. And we can all do simple math. 10 minus 3 is 7. So this Kisame statement actually corroborates the one said years ago by the other nameless Akatsuki member. Meaning, so far in the story, we're expected to believe that Itachi was 10 years old when he first joined the Akatsuki. Now, this on its own isn't too massive of an issue, as you could simply imply that Itachi joined the Akatsuki prior to his departure to the Leaf Village, following the massacre of the Uchiha clan, and was both a Konoha ninja as well as an Akatsuki member. Which, if you're reading this from around 2008 to 2009 when these chapters were releasing, you'd be at no fault for coming to this conclusion, as the story has completely laid out the groundwork for it to be a logical conclusion that follows. However, the issue comes in later when we're told that Itachi was a Leaf Ninja until 13 and not an Akatsuki member until after he left the village, which is exactly the problem with this. I'll get into Itachi's other actions in part 2 in a bit, but as of right now, this time-alone issue alone creates a plot hole that puts extreme doubt in my head that Kishimoto had this all thought out from the start. And on top of it, all up until Obito's revelation of the truth, literally everything makes sense for Itachi to just be a bad guy, and it makes far more sense than him having any sort of good bone in his body, yet it's played up as he planned this all along and knew all the moves that he would be making. I think now is a good time to mention that I don't hate this plot twist. I think it actually makes Itachi one of the more interesting characters in the franchise, and it did far more good than it did bad, especially when you talk about how the franchise is successful as a whole. And I can't even call it lazy writing, because Kishimoto works hard to cover his tracks on this, and outside of the timeline statements that we're given here, he does a fairly good job. But just a throwaway line or two about Kisame and Sasori maybe being bad with time, and you got this plot hole completely covered. But anyway, let's move on to Itachi's actions in the Uchiha Massacre flashback, and then his actions in part 2. The Uchiha flashback is just how you'd expect it to be during the time of reading or watching Naruto for the first time you go through it. Itachi seems like a troubled kid who inevitably we all know is going to go on a murder spree and kill his entire family. Itachi seems distant throughout the entire story, and he even monologues about being done with the clan after seemingly being pretty guilty for the murder of Shisui and assaulting the police officers who accused him of the crime. Let's look at this through the lens of someone who's read or watched the entire series. Itachi is upset that his friend just unalived himself and now is being accused of killing his best friend by 3 police officers and in a fit of rage beat them up for accusing him. He then thinks the clan is doomed and there is no way to save them, because at this point he knows of the coup d'etat and has had his meeting with Konoha and already been presented with the idea of having to kill them for the sake of the village. So he makes up his mind here. That's all fine and good, makes sense, but why fake Shisui's suicide note? As far as we know, it's never been cleared up that Itachi didn't fake Shisui's suicide note. There's nothing written in the novel, databook, anime, or manga that implies Shisui wrote one himself or told Itachi to write one following his demise, so why do it? The only thing I can think of is Itachi wrote it to make sure there isn't any suspicion that any other Leaf Ninja did it outside the clan, because at this point, like I mentioned earlier, he should still be trying to save said clan. Obviously, my thoughts earlier should indicate that I think the original intention for this was just for Itachi to be an evil bastard who killed his friend and faked the suicide note, got mad, and when he got caught. But like I said, Kishimoto does well covering his tracks. Other than that, the rest of this is just how it is. Regardless of why Itachi did what he did, he still murdered his entire family and left only Sasuke alive after putting him in Tsukuyomi. He also tells Sasuke to amass tons of hatred and encourages him to get the Mangekyo Sharingan by killing his closest friend and blah 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 evil man banter. There is one last thing I want to mention about this though, but it's not revealed until later into part 2, but Sasuke tells us that he had suppressed a memory that Itachi was actually crying during this day. So yeah, do with that what you will. Now we're moving on to early part 2, because Itachi's actions after chapter 397 don't matter since he's revealed to be a good guy, and all his actions from there on out when he's revived are just the acts of what a good person would do. This might come as a surprise to some people, but Itachi doesn't really even talk much in Naruto part 2. He has a few lines, but none of them really indicate that he's evil anymore. At this point, he's more so calmed down, and I think Kishimoto was steering us in the direction of him being a good guy. But he doesn't really say anything. There's nothing really to dissect at this part in the story. We do know that he gave Naruto the crow, which eventually led to him getting broken out of the Edo Tensei, but it was originally meant for Sasuke. And looking at the context of this, it doesn't seem too bad to think that way. He also mentions to Naruto how Sasuke is a blank canvas and he can still be dyed any color. So at this point, it's not all too clear that Itachi is still evil. So I don't really feel the need to go over it anymore. Outside of obviously whenever he's literally lying to Sasuke about taking his eyes and whatnot, he's doing evil things there. But other than that, he's more or less just a villain because we know he's a villain. He doesn't even help Kisame in murdering the Four Tails. So like I said, it's not all too clear that he's still evil at this point, and he's just more so chilling rather than earlier where he was running around beating everybody up. But that's all for the video. Obviously, if you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And other than that, have a nice day.